It's NBA award season, and the awards and who's going to win them tells you something very compelling about the NBA draft. Next on Locked on Jazz. Bum, 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 bum.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked on Jazz. It's your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully make it way better to be a Jazz fan. On today's edition, we're going to look at the 15 likely first team, second team, third team All-NBA and how their draft position tells the story. Stretch it out to the top 25 players who will probably get votes and look at that. How will the NHL impact the Utah Jazz if, in fact, all the reports from yesterday are accurate that the NHL is coming to Utah? And number three, do you like where the Rockets are? This offseason, we're going to digest all of the different potential models by which you rebuild a franchise. I like what the Rockets have done. Do you like what the Rockets have done? Also, what the Bulls did. And I like what the Bulls did, but nobody likes what the Bulls did. So we'll try to figure that out a little bit in the offseason, but some today. As I mentioned, this is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast in the Utah Jazz. Thank you very much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps, as well as on YouTube. Please follow, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, hit that bell button so you're notified every time Ron and I go live after a game for the next 3 times. And thank you for being a part of it. To the everydayers, you're the best, particularly right now in the midst of a 13-game losing streak. The fact you're sticking with it, I greatly appreciate it. I thank you for that. I know that's who you are at your core, and it's awesome. And I am very, very appreciative of it. I still love what we're doing every day. I'm still honored to do it every day. I'll call the final home game tonight, and I'll certainly take an extra moment or two as I walk out of the building and just kind of cherish what we have in this market, who all of you are, how you support the team, what an incredible fan base that I get to call games for. And that I've gotten to call games for, and what an amazing 15 years run I've had as your radio voice. So I will certainly stop tonight before walking out of the arena and heading to the airplane to go to Los Angeles for the final second, and then Golden State. Take a moment and just kind of cherish the building. Realize you're not going to be back in there, and take that moment. And really, a lot of it has to do with you, the fans, who bring this incredible connection to our marketplace and what we have as a team. All right, let's get to today's show. So I've kind of gone through a bunch of the different awards, ballots, listened to various people. There's some variations on it, but I think the 15 kind of are close right now. The only one is that because of some of the injuries and guys not playing enough games, like Joel Embiid should be on this list, and he's probably not. So I think that's probably it. So it's a little, that's the only thing where I didn't love, and I couldn't figure out what to do about that. So, of the top players in the NBA that are not going to be mentioned in this, I think you have Jimmy Butler is probably not going to be all NBA. Joel Embiid is not going to, because of games played. I think Donovan had a chance. He was having a pretty good year. He is not as recently, but he had a pretty good year. So those are probably the three. What's worth noting on what we're about to talk about, those three, Joel Embiid was the third pick of a draft. Jimmy Butler was the last pick of a first round, and Donovan was the middle of a first round. Okay, so it kind of matches what I'm about to say to you. So just so I quickly have it, the first team, and this really, I'm not trying to debate or make a statement here. I've just kind of grabbed other people's lists, and I think this is kind of consensus. The first team is Jokic, Doncic, Shea, Giannis, and Jason Tatum. Now, the only question was whether Jalen Brunson would knock out Jason Tatum. The second team being Durant, Kawhi Leonard, Anthony Edwards, Jalen Brunson, Anthony Davis. And the third team, Jaylen Brown, Halliburton, LeBron James, Steph Curry, and Domantas Sabonis. I think the next 10, from everything I looked at, were Devin Booker, De'Aaron Fox, Tyrese Maxey, Victor Wembanyama, Bam Adebayo, Zion Williamson, Dame Lillard, Rudy Gobert, Paul George, and Jalen Williams of Oklahoma City. I might have put Chet in there in front of Jalen Williams, but okay, go with it. Now, and again, those 3 that I mentioned probably deserve to be in that list, and in that bottom 10, the only other one might have been if a Karl Anthony Towns got into that list, but otherwise, I think we're pretty good there. And Rudy, for being Defensive Player of the Year, gets mentioned. I don't know if I really think he should be in that 10, but we'll go with it. So here's what's interesting about this, and here's the biggest thing: drafting early really helps. Not the biggest surprise in the world, but drafting in the top 3 really matters. Part 2, getting as many swings in the draft as you possibly can really matters. Those are my 2 takeaways from this. So, of the top 15 players, 13 of the top 15 are in the top 15 picks. So Jokic and Brunson are these outliers. But it doesn't mean that that's happening very often. 13 of the top 15 were top 15 picks. Of the next 10, 8 of the 10 are. So of the top 25 players in the NBA, 21 of the 25 are top 15 picks. The exceptions, by the way, were Rudy Gobert and Tyrese Maxey in the bottom 10. And Rudy, you can decide whether you think he's top 25 player in the NBA. He's had a great year, Defensive Player of the Year, and looked great last night, actually. Okay, so that's the first one. As many swings as possible. Keeping our pick this year mattered. Like, that's a good idea. Keep the pick. And then we'll see what happens next year. But if you can get better next year and then you have Cleveland and Minnesota's picks, then it's a better time to use that pick. So that makes sense. We've done it extremely well. So 13 of the top 15 picks and 21 of the top 25 were top 15 picks. Now, so that's swings. You need swings in the draft. And good swings, frankly. The next one was top impact of being top 10. 50%, 12 of 25 of these players. Well, let's go start with 7 of 15. So about 50% of the all NBA players were top 10 picks. 7 of 15. Like, if you want a great player, you get a top 10 pick. Like, the drafting's really, for as much as everybody talks about how bad the drafting is, that's actually pretty good. Actually, 8 of the 15 were top 10. 8 of the 15. Steph Curry, and then 5 of the next 10. So 13 of the top 25 players in the NBA were top 10 picks. Okay, so part 2 is you actually want swings, good swings. Where your swings matter. And the final one that is like why people tank and really tank all year is 7 of the top 15 are top 3 picks. Doncic, Tatum, Durant, Anthony Edwards, Anthony Davis, LeBron James, Jaylen Brown. In the next grouping, Victor Wembanyama, Zion Williamson. So 10 of the top 25, or 9 of the top 25 are top 3 picks. 10 of the top 25 are top 5 picks. Matters. I think this draft isn't supposed to be very good. I'll still take a winning the lottery and go in top 4. So the summation here, which is not groundbreaking, but it is revealing, is that 1, yes, getting a top 3 pick really matters. So for those that have been saying the Jazz didn't tank enough the last 2 years, and we should have been where Houston is, those 3 years of just being dreadful and non-competitive for all 82 games, there's your argument. Doncic, Tatum, Durant, Anthony Edwards, Anthony Davis, Jaylen Brown. The numbers say it. 7 of the top 15 players this year in the NBA were top 3 picks. 9 of the top 25. On the argument of just make your trades, get your draft picks, get your swings, keep your pick this year. Of top 10, 8 of the top 15 players were top 10 picks, Steph Curry being the other one that's added to that list. And 13 of the top 25 were top 10 picks. Matters. And then, frankly, top 15 matters. The 26th pick is seemingly not as valuable as the 13th pick. Not stunning, but revealing. As 21 of the top 25 players were drafted in the top 15. So the NBA awards do tell a story about the NBA draft. How will the NHL impact the Utah Jazz if in fact they're coming? And do you like where the Rockets are? We're just getting started on today's edition of Locked On Jazz. Thank you so much for tuning into today's program. I greatly appreciate it. Today's show, by the way, is brought to you in part by FanDuel. FanDuel, make moments more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We are just getting started today. How will the NHL impact the Utah Jazz? Next on Locked On Jazz. Today's edition of Locked On Jazz brought to you in part by our friends over at Nissan with 3 different vehicles over at NissanUSA.com that will fire you up. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is the perfect city driver for great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is always updating assistant to call on almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone with Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store built right in. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure. And the incredible lineup includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder. Has room up to 8, expansive cargo capacity, advanced available 4x4 capabilities with 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds of towing. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there for you. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or that great Nissan Armada, all out for your next adventure. Shop at NissanUSA.com. That's NissanUSA.com. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. Have you made the switch yet, like I have, to Locked On Sports Today? It's Locked On's 24/7 national streaming channel. It's Locked On Sports Today. It is all of the local experts of Locked On giving you the inside scoop on the various stories, biggest stories for the local experts on all across the country. Go grab it on YouTube at 20 or on Amazon Fire TV. Throw it up on the TV instead of ESPN or Fox. It's Locked On Sports Today. So the big news yesterday was that the NHL, here's the really big news. The big news, there's a lot of stuff in it. There was a huge amount of news yesterday. But the biggest news, basically, the NHL's put out their schedule. Involves having a team in Salt Lake next year. Like their schedule has a contingency that there's a team in Salt Lake City next year. That's big time. That means it's happening. It means that when the Locked On Podcast Network NHL Power Rankings came out yesterday, I checked to see that the Coyotes were 13th in the West. That's what you might be getting. Now, let's talk about this for a second. First off, and most of all, this would be I'm just going to isolate the Jazz here in a second. But before I do that, this would be a mammothly important moment for the evolution of our market. And to get a second team in the league, professional, along with soccer, with our 2 universities, with another Olympics coming, Ryan Smith's goal of trying to change how Salt Lake is perceived, this would be a large part. It's a very different thing than being a one sports market. It matters. So how does it impact the Jazz? Well, I think the first thing you have to just admit if you're involved in the Jazz, myself, or just even as a fan, is there'd be a new shiny object in town. A new shiny object for sponsors, a new shiny object for fans, a new shiny object. There's just no question that I think that there would be a new shiny object in town that would probably get a little bit more attention attention that people would be fired up about. Opening night for the NHL non-Coyotes would be way bigger deal than opening night for the Utah Jazz. Like, that's the reality. Ryan Smith as an ownership group would have a new shiny object. Good or bad, I just think you have to admit that. From a business standpoint, there'd be a business pull to it. Now, the Jazz have done some really interesting things, and I can attest as the radio voice of the team. When I used to do reads and announcements during games and sponsors, I used to have, 6 or 7 of the same category on our broadcast, and I'd have to be really careful that if I ever fell behind, I didn't put one sponsor next to the next sponsor that was the exact same type of company. We've changed the way we do that. We have the official credit union, American First Credit Union, of the Utah Jazz at this point. We have the official bank, Zions Bank, of the Utah Jazz. And so I do think that the first off question of whether there is enough sponsorship in the market, the answer is yes. Because once you've gone to exclusives, then a bunch of people are left out, and they'll be able to jump in on the other side, or the same group will decide, American First will decide, well, we're just going to own sports in the market. And so we'll have both these sponsorships. So I don't think there's any question that there is the marketplace. We don't have the huge corporate sponsors. It's not like San Francisco where, there's any of 12 companies from Salesforce on to be able to choose. But we are rising up in the amount of companies that we have that might be able to do something for us. So I think that there is a new shiny object. I think that there is a business pull. And I do think that fans' attention will turn like I do. Now, I think what gets interesting on this is if you lose 13 in a row, your fan base can now turn their eye to something else, right? Like, I think that's going to be an interesting little thing for Jazz fans. If we have another team in town and one of the two teams is struggling, do you suddenly turn your attention elsewhere? You have another choice. I think that's we have not really ever had that in our market. You're either a BYU or a Utah fan. If your team's struggling, you're still following, and you're really pretty much kind of set with being a Utah Jazz fan. And now if you have the non-Coyotes, you have an opportunity to maybe follow something else if you understand the sport. I think that's it. There'll be an education, certainly, to following the sport. But I actually think, you're listening to this show, you're a diehard NBA fan, you're really knowledgeable about this. I actually don't think most fans are as knowledgeable. In fact, I've changed my radio call a great deal over the years, kind of understanding where most fans who are tuned in are with their knowledge base. And so the fact that you don't really understand the line change or the hockey or the spacing or the play that's being called or any of the things that I don't understand, I'm not sure totally matters to you in the sense that in the sense that you're just watching to see if the ball goes in the back of the net and see that excitement. The bigger one, I think, two things I think on this. The market perspective change, this is where I started. It would be mammothly important for the city of Salt Lake, the state of Utah, and I think for the Jazz franchise. Like, I think, if you think about how the Phoenix Suns are perceived, and obviously weather is part of it, but the Phoenix Suns are perceived so positively as this, like, ideal market. And, okay, like, most of the criticisms of Salt Lake City, Utah can go to Phoenix, Arizona, too, frankly. Like, I don't need to give the list. You know it. But if you want to get into, like, the list of things that people criticize Salt Lake for, most of those are true in Phoenix, too, other than their weather is better in the winter, which might be all that matters. But the other thing, yet Phoenix has MLB, hockey, NFL, NBA, and is perceived as a major market. And it's, suburban sprawl is certainly mammoth. And so, but, I think that when you look at that, I'm not sure that, like, I think that's a good example of a market that the perception of it is it's much bigger deal than Salt Lake City, Utah. Is it, right? Like, yes, I think their metro is like 4 million and our metro is 2. So yeah, they're double the size, but I don't know that I think it's like that much of a bigger deal market-wise. Frankly, Denver's metro is like 2.9 and ours is 2.1, and they're thought of as just a dramatically different market than we are because of the fact they have the Rockies, the Broncos, the Avalanche, and the Nuggets. I'm not sure they have that much more business than we do at this point. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but frankly, they're not that dramatically bigger than who we are. I think there's like San Diego's going to win this game because of weather, but it gets interesting. Like, how does San Diego perceive suddenly they have the Padres and that's it? And we have two teams. Like, St. Louis is a market that I think is really similar to Salt Lake, is thought of as much bigger than Salt Lake. Well, if they suddenly have, right, the Cardinals and we have two, like, how do we compare it? So I do think it's a massively important concept to how we look at, how we're looked at. I think you have Minneapolis is certainly a bigger market than we are, but it's not dramatic. I mean, it's a probably 3.1 and we're 2 point whatever, 1 or 2, and they've got 4, right? So I do think we're at the right stage to make this jump, and I think it's important to separate us from the Sacramentos of the world, from like the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvanias of the world, and for us to vault ourselves into a new realm of cities. Like, can we be the Charlotte of the Rocky Mountain? Obviously, Atlanta is the key city of the South, and Nashville's on fire, and Charlotte's kind of number 3. Denver's the city of the Rocky Mountain. Can we really fully establish ourselves? Vegas is kind of their Nashville. Can we establish ourselves in the desert? Phoenix has kind of got us. Like, you kind of look at the Phoenix, Vegas, Colorado, non-coastal, like, we're probably number 4. Can we vault ourselves into something better than that? I think that really matters from it. But so those are things. And the final thing I would just say from a Jazz standpoint is basketball is part of this culture, right? There aren't hockey rinks in the bottom of every ward. Basketball is a part of this culture, and it'll be fun. It'll be great. It's good for the marketplace. Us embracing the Olympics while everybody else is running away from it. It's another one that's great for us. If we can get Major League Baseball, it'll be super. But I think, like, there's no question that basketball is an essence and part of the culture of Utah, and always has been, always will be. And I think the Jazz will always have that special place because of that. So that's my thought on how I think it'd be great. I'm all for it. And I think what Ryan Smith is doing is just, that it's another great example. We couldn't have had better ownership in the Utah Jazz. I mean, let's give Sam Battistone credit for getting them here. Larry and Gale could not have been better owners for the Utah Jazz. And then there is a real argument that can be made that is there couldn't have been a better time and transition to a more aggressive-minded Ryan Smith. I don't suspect that the Millers would be grabbing an NHL franchise right now, particularly since Delta Center was built solely to not have hockey. So this seems to me like where the world is, that this is the right time, and that this is a good example that maybe we have, another great, that Ryan's ownership lead change from the Millers happened at the right time for our city. We've been very, very fortunate with this leadership along the way. All right. Do we like where the Rockets are? We'll talk about it when we continue here on Locked On Jazz. Today's edition of Locked On Jazz is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Here's the deal right now. It's playoff time. NBA, NHL, baseball's in full swing. So many things to get involved in. So FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe and secure and easy to use. What are you waiting for? No longer wait. Make the playoffs fun. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Let's look at the FanDuel sportsbook. Can't imagine what the lines are on some of these games. The NBA's got an issue with the amount of teams that are not trying to win games. So Chicago's a 9.5-point favorite over Detroit tonight. New York and Boston have a good one coming up. The Knicks are favored in Boston because they're not sure who Boston's going to play. Houston's a 10.5-point favorite over the Jazz tonight. Sacramento and New Orleans, a massive game tonight. And that one has got Sacramento as a 1-point favorite. That's a good one. And then the Warriors are a 14-point favorite over the Portland Trailblazers. And now that we're NHL fans, by the way, Detroit is a 1.5-point, I think, dog to Pittsburgh, as are the Devils to the Maple Leafs, and the Lightning ahead are 1.5-point favorites over Ottawa. Major League Baseball, all sorts of fun games, by the way. You can bet on who's going to hit a home run today in the Mets-Braves game. All sorts of great fun at FanDuel. That would be so fun to try to guess who's going to hit a home run every day and just sit there and watch it. Oh, I love that. FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Thanks very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. So the Rockets come into town at 500. And I think that, we're going to study all the models out there. And so I'm doing this briefly right now. I think the Rockets are interesting. And I'm curious of what you think, and put it in the chat room or hit me on X of what you think about where the Rockets are. So here's what the Rockets did. They lost in the Western Conference Finals in the 1920 season, going 44-20 on a team that was largely driven by James Harden and Russell Westbrook, and it fell apart. And then they had to trade Russell Westbrook's contract, and they ended up having to give away a lot, and then they bottomed out. So for 3 seasons, they won 17, 20, and 22 games. They did for entire 3 straight years what we've done pretty much for the last month. Wow! Out at the end of those 3 years, they had Jalen Green, which is a top 5 pick, Jabari Smith, a top 5 pick, Amon Thompson, a top 5 pick. And so to the point of earlier, they got themselves 3 top 5 picks. And they also got an Alfred Şengün on a great trade along the way. So those are their players that they grabbed. Jalen Green with the number 2 pick of the 2021 draft. Jabari Smith with the number 3 pick, I believe, of the 2022 draft, Jabari Smith Jr. And then they got Amon Thompson with the 5th pick or 4th pick of this 2023 draft. So they tanked it all the way to the bottom. And now then, with those 3 young players, they then went into the free agent market heavy and signed big deals to 2 non-all-star players because that's what was available. And so they signed Fred VanVleet to a 3-year, $128 million contract, 83 of which is guaranteed. But a $40 million a year for Fred VanVleet. And then they went and signed Dillon Brooks, the controversial Dillon Brooks, for a 4-year, $86 million contract. Okay, so they went and signed Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVleet, neither of which will ever be an all-star, both of which are nice players, and got themselves to respectability 500, made a nice little fun little run, winning 7 in a row, had a good little surge in there, got a new head coach, went from being a bad defensive team to a good defensive team, have some structure, and they're 39-40 in their 4th year straight without making the playoffs, and they'll be waiting to see when their young guys come together. And Alfred Şengün may or may not be their best player. They have some more moves. They have some flexibility. Do we like where the Rockets are? What this is I call the draft and pivot. And we're going to break all these down. Like Orlando's just done the draft and wait. This is the draft and pivot. Chicago did the same thing. You draft 2 or 3 years worth of young players. And then as we've talked about all year, young players take a really, really long time. And so then rather than just doing what Orlando's done, which is drafting for 9 straight years and waiting, you then go and add a bunch of veterans to your team. Chicago had done this. They drafted Kobe White and Patrick Williams and Wendell Carter Jr. and somebody else. And then they pivoted with the Nikola Vucevic trade, which turned out to be a bad trade, and the Lonzo Ball signing, which turned out to not be a very good signing because he got hurt, and the DeMar DeRozan signing. And so a little bit they got kind of stuck by having just bad luck. Here Houston goes and they signed 2 like above average players, but non-all-stars, to massive deals. And now they don't have their pick this year because of the fact that they had to give it up they might have, I think they have somebody else's pick. I'll have to look at that. But their pick goes to Oklahoma City because they had to give it up in the Russell Westbrook trade. So ironically enough. And so they were kind of forced into this. They get Brooklyn's trade. They get Brooklyn's pick. So they will draft 9th, and then their 12th pick will go to Oklahoma City. So they actually do get a pick in this draft, and it'll be the 9th pick of the draft. So they add another piece to this puzzle. The VanVleet deal, by the way, is worth noting that it's the 2nd year the 3rd year is not guaranteed. So do you like where they are? Like if you were a Houston Rocket fan, would you be all right with 3 years of that pain? And then where they are right now, would that make you feel as though like, okay, that's worth it We paid the price. We're now 500. Our young kids are developing. We have Brooklyn's 9th pick. We have a pick swap with Brooklyn in 2025. We have Brooklyn's pick in 2026. We have a complicated deal where Oklahoma City kind of gets our pick in 2026. We have a pick swap in 2027. So we have, if you're the Rockets, do you feel like that's good that you have $40 million tied up with and VanVleet's deal is interesting. Like, this is where I ask the question about DeMar DeRozan for the Jazz. DeMar DeRozan's a free agent in the offseason. Should the Jazz give DeMar DeRozan the deal that the Rockets gave Fred VanVleet, which is a 3-year, $120 million deal, 40 a year, but only 2 years of it's guaranteed. And then DeMar DeRozan kind of gets you to respectability. He plays with Lowry. Your young guys don't have the burden. I think we've seen right now when Keontae and the guys are overwhelmed. And I think we saw that Jalen Green was super overwhelmed, having to do the same thing. There is really something maybe to be said by not throwing the rookie all the way out in the deep end of the sea and over dipping the Oreo cookie. You want my obnoxious comment of the day? You know what? If you're 31 minutes in, I literally turned to my wife last night. I was like, do you think my listeners actually know how often I'm right? Oh, that was so arrogant. She's like, you're obnoxious. I told you Minnesota would compete for the 1 seed even without Karl-Anthony Towns, and they did. They didn't get it. But I told you they'd be fine. That's what leveled that comment. I told you that over dipping Oreo cookies is bad. I told you. All right. It was Locked On Jazz. Have a great one. That was so arrogant. I hope you're laughing with me. I only kind of believe some of that. Have a great one. I hope you're laughing. Let's send you the first ever 24/7 national sports stream. Locked On Sports Today with the Amazon Fire or YouTube TV. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today.